That's the turbo sitting there. As we can see, I've used titanium studs with stainless Nordlock washers, and then copper coated steel lock nuts. So I've had problems in the past where those fasteners have worked themselves loose. So I'm trying to take every precaution to try and keep the studs from falling out. Should that not work, I'll probably lose patience and weld the turbo to the manifold. This is where I'm at the moment. Manifold's installed, turbo's installed, heat shield, oil feed, oil return. So I had to take the sump off once I found out exactly where this was going, and weld on this AN fitting so it drops straight down, real nice and simple. The factory oil return for the turbo is just here, and this is a non-turbo sump, so it's actually blocked off, but I find it's far more elegant to drop it straight down here than work the return past the exhaust and past all this other crap to come all the way over here. So I think that's a better way. I've also fabricated up a wee brace for the turbo. This is very important. You can imagine if you, for example, land a jump or land on a rock and the bottom of the exhaust gets whacked upwards, and all you've got holding the turbo on is your studs in the head, well, it's just going to pull those studs straight out of the head. So that is very important to stop that from happening. And then I've also put in a dipstick so I can measure my oil. So this is a 3S GTE dipstick off my previous motor. Didn't really bolt on, so I made up this wee bracket. And there's two M10 fasteners holding it together, so it's definitely overkill. But she's nice and solid, and that should do the job over here. And then down here I have installed the oil filter relocation plate thingy, and then attach the oil cooler lines. I just punched this off my last motor, nothing wrong with it, works pretty well. So the oil will be kept nice and cool now. And then along with welding that in, I've also welded in this other fitting here, and so what this does is drains from the oil catch can. So the vapor will feed in from the head into the catch can, and in there's like a filter element which will hopefully separate the oil from the vapor. Hopefully we get air coming out the top there, and then the oil will condense at the bottom and then drain back into the sump. I've never done this sort of setup before, so hopefully it works. I have installed the coil packs, just made up a wee bracket so they just sit in there. I would kind of prefer to have sort of the coil on plug arrangement. These motors do have them from factory and they do work quite well. I used them on my last engine. I did have a couple of failures, mostly due to age. You know, they were 20-year-old coils, so it's not really surprising. So I bought these brand new ones down here, and they are really good. I think they're kind of a LS style thing. They call them IGN1A things. I presume they're from China. They are sold here by a local reputable shop, so I've never had any problems with them, and they provide really good spark. So they'll stay there for now. I do need to shorten up some of these leads a bit. Right now I've got them sticking down and then coming back up. So I just need to get some new pins, and then I'll shorten those at some point. Not a big deal for now. And what I have done is extended the VVTi signal wires, not signal, basically the feed to the solenoids. So what I did is got TXL wire with some braid which just matches the rest of the loom, and then some heat shrink to join them. I got a bit eager with the heat gun and melted that one a little bit. Should be right. So I had to extend both of those wires, and the air intake temperature sensor wire, which was sitting a bit further this way than it last did, so again just extended that one. This is the next wee mod I've done. Gearbox oil cooler. So it's just a basic little oil cooler which could be used for an engine or anything else, and it's got a probably overly substantial brace there, and then it ties in to this little brace here, which like the inner guard wheel liner bolts onto, so that all sort of ties in nicely and makes this corner of the car pretty strong. So going on the theory that we want roughly 1/3 of the surface area of the cooler as an intake, and then in theory what it does, probably not the best example, but what it will do is slow the air down, and that will increase the pressure, and so when you slow the air down it takes longer to go through the heat exchanger with a higher pressure. So in theory it should get good airflow through the exchanger, and then it will naturally, the hot air will naturally radiate upwards, which will help with the air flowing through it, and it sort of mirrors the what it's doing there. Engine oil cooler on this side. So we have a bit of symmetry, and there's a nice little intake on the bumper down here which will nicely feed it. We'll have a look underneath, and it's just some AN lines which tee into the factory gearbox oil cooler lines. On my previous setup I didn't run a gearbox oil cooler, and I think that was a mistake. So these ST185s and all Celica GT-Fours, to my knowledge, run a factory gearbox oil cooler. I think it's part of the homologation rule, so they need it in order for it to run during for the factory built rally cars. I thought it was probably overkill it's definitely overkill for a street car, but probably not a bad idea for a rally car. I can't remember what my thinking was at the time, but I wanted to lead it, and I've been through a few transfers in the last few years, I think due to my oil temperature getting too hot, and obviously I've got a rather expensive gear kit in there now, so I want to look after that. So I think this cooler is hopefully a good upgrade, and what I quite like, so we've got those engine oil cooler lines there, and then we come across and we've got symmetrical lines, which makes me feel nice inside. It's the small things which I find satisfaction in. Yeah, anyway, that's worked out really nicely. What I've done now is install the radiator, and I've made up some mounts here for a thermofan, and then installed radiator hoses. What I did was I just went online and ordered a kit for ST185. I sort of guessed they'd be pretty much bang on, and they were absolutely perfect. All I needed to do was trim a wee bit of length off that, and that's worked out beautifully. So the good thing is, if I want spares, I just go onto the internet and buy another kit. So what I'm going to do now, in theory, this cooling system is all sealed up, so I'm going to fill it up, make sure it doesn't come out the bottom, and then pressurize it and make sure it holds pressure. This thing is so handy. So if you don't know, what it does is pressurizes the cooling system to simulate it under driving load. So you can put it under whatever pressure you want within reason. So what this will do is pressurize it, and if there's any leaks you'll see fluid coming out. You don't actually need to put fluid in the system, you can just pressurize it with air, but there's two little problems with that. One, you've got to fill the entire system with a lot more air, so you just got to pump it a lot to get it up to pressure. And two, if you've got a leak, you can sometimes hear them, but it's more obvious when you've got a stream of liquid coming out from the leak, which makes it easier to diagnose. So I like to fill it up with liquid, and then there's very little space in the top here to fill up with air. So this is like the wee adapter thing, so that's just takes the place of the radiator cap. And we've already got a leak. I found a couple of wee leaks. Firstly, this one here. So I had the factory hose clampy thing, which wasn't really doing its job, so I just shuffled that along and put an ordinary hose clamp on there. It sorted that leak. And the other one was this water fitting to cool the turbo. So that just wasn't quite done up tight enough. It's pretty tricky to get in there. Had to customise a wrench to get in there. So what I like to do is, so roughly the system will hold 15 psi. So I will run it up a bit higher, 20 or whatever, and see if it holds pressure. And maybe leave it here for half an hour or something. So right now we're at about 18 psi, 17, 18 psi. Doesn't appear to be any drips out of the bottom, no new ones anyway. I'll come back in half an hour and see what the pressure's like. So it's looking pretty good now. It's about half an hour that I left it at. Come on, focus. Left it at 20 and it's dropped a minuscule amount, so I'm pretty happy with that. It wasn't perfect straight away. I had to go around and nip up a few hose clamps, and since I did that, it's been perfect. Now the next thing before we start it, hooked up the laptop to the ECU, disable all the injectors so engine won't start. So we still want it to spark, and we want it to spark so we can check the base timing. So I've hooked up the battery pack here, two reasons. Mainly so I can, I wired it directly to the starter, so I can start it here while not being in the car, and also it provides power for the timing light. Right, let's give it a go. Now it's getting exciting. We've got oil in the motor, oil in the gearbox, coolant in there. Basically we're going to get ready to start. What the next thing we need to do, a very important step, is crank the motor over and check for oil pressure. So I've unhooked the crank sensor so it will never start, and I will crank it over here and we hopefully will see some oil pressure here on our powertrain dash. So it wasn't getting any oil pressure. The motor was cranking over pretty slow, so I checked the battery terminal and it was a bit loose, so I tightened it up. So now it should crank over a bit faster. Right, we've got very healthy oil pressure there now. Very good. So the sequential shifter didn't work, and after a bit of mucking around I found out it had too much stroke. So basically there was 58mm of stroke for the cable that goes in and out of the gears, not across the gate. The one that goes across the gate was perfect. And then measured up my gearbox, and that was 33mm. So that's 18mm less stroke. So what I've had to do is extend that by 25mm. I worked it out doing some quick maths here on the Fusion 360. So this here is the length of the lever, 52mm, and it had 38mm stroke. Obviously the angle is fixed, which is effectively the angle it needs to get into gears. So if we extend that down to 58mm stroke, then we need to add 24.4mm to it. So that's what I did. Let's see if it works. Now it's time to start it up, go through the gears.
Great success.
Because I've changed so much of the front of the car, the old bash plate won't fit, so I've got to make a new one. So I've drawn up a 2D profile in Fusion 360 and come across to the CNC plasma table. So we've got that all set up there, ready to cut out of 5mm aluminium plate. The last one was made out of stainless steel and worked really well, but it was quite heavy. So I've decided to change it up and go for aluminium. There we go, it's done a really nice job. It's not going to be a plain flat piece like that though, it's going to have some folds in it. It's going to have this bit here folded up, same as the other side, and then a couple of folds crosswise just to come down and clear the motor. I don't have the means here to bend 5mm sheet, so I'm just going to mark the bend lines where they need to be and drop it off around the corner to a local sheet metal workshop. Here is the finished bash plate. You can see here I've welded in an extra rib just to give it a bit more strength. It now becomes somewhat of a structural member. It means it should be able to take a good hit. I should also be able to jack the car up off the plate, and you can see it's welded, not brilliantly, but welded on the sides there. Pretty happy with how it all turned out. When we spin it around, I've made a jacking point there, which will just make it easy to jack it up, means it won't slide off. So we are about to bolt it up and hopefully it fits. Bash plate's all bolted up, fits in there really nice. At the back here I've used like button head screws, so if it gets rubbed on a rock it won't round off the hex on them. It could still potentially like sort of ruin the inside of the hex, but this is what I ran before and it never had any problem. And also this bit here is slightly lower than this, so this is going to take the majority of the impact, as well as the bash plate. I've also made these little rubber covers. They just stop the engine bay filling up with stones and dust and mud and crap. I've never had these on before and I've wanted to do them for years, so now is the time. It's just like some 5mm rubber, the same stuff as what I use for mud flaps. So yeah, pretty happy with that. And the same on the other side. This is something I've also wanted to do for a very long time. Make some proper ducting for the cooling system. So this is aluminium, as my usual kind of process. Draw it up on Fusion 360, plasma it out, and then in this case I got some rollers, borrowed some rollers and put a curve in this sheet, and then a couple of 90-degree bends, welded it together. The trickiest bit was actually getting around these headlights, which are a pain in the ass. And then down here, pretty much the same sort of thing. You can see it's not quite even, so it's wider on this side than it is on that side. There is a reason for that, and that's for the tow hook which comes through here. And then we can see the bottom of our bash plate, which comes forward and serves as the bottom member of the ducting. So it's all sort of works in really nicely, and I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. One little irritating thing is I need to put some bolts through here to hold the bumper on, so I've had to drill some holes in there. Eventually I will seal it all off with tape or sealant foam, just so all the air goes through. I'm in a bit of a rush at the moment. As well as the engine bay, I've had to do a bit of work on the interior as well. Big job in the interior here was mounting the sequential shifter. Mechanically it's pretty simple. Just had to make up a little bracket there, which is kind of hard to see, but it's not very exciting. There's a lot of wiring going on here, so it's got its little control box which activates these solenoids, so it gets a bunch of inputs and outputs which feed into that, and then feeds the gear display, which I've mounted up next to the power tune. At some point I'll feed it through the power tune itself and not use the gear position, but that'll work for now. There's also a bit of wiring to tidy up here, and then one thing I haven't done, which I need to do at some point, is run inputs into the ECU from the gear shifter. That means I can set up flat shifting, but for now it just works as a standalone unit. What I've also done is flock the dash. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. Makes it look real race car spec now. It was a pretty horrible dash before. Most of these ST185 dashes split quite bad up through here, so I've sort of cut it and filled it up with some silicone to smooth it off a little bit. It doesn't look great, but it looks better than before, so I'm reasonably happy. I've also remounted the seat. The old seat rails were a bit average, so I've redone those as well. So it's a bit of a tidy interior now. There's definitely some more stuff I can tidy up down the track, but for now it'll hopefully work pretty well. Got the car out of the shed, drove out pretty nicely actually. Gave it a bit of a clean. There was 6 months worth of dust built up on it, so it was looking like a real mess. I'm going to take it around the block, make sure it works. The main thing I'm checking is making sure it goes through all the gears and the power steering works and the motor doesn't explode as well. It's untuned, so we'll take it pretty easy. But yeah, it's pretty exciting to finally get it out, get it on its wheels. It's the front end is just basically thrown together at the moment with the bumper on there. This is all in preparation to take it to the dyno tomorrow. just taken the car around the block, pretty happy. It all works really nicely. The motor revs out nice and smooth. The gearbox shifts beautifully. I feel like a real race car driver now. The power steering works really nice. It's nice and light. So great success really. Next episode, it's going on the dyno. We're going to see how much power it makes. Thanks very much for watching everyone. See you next time.